Something strange happened to me last night, and I don't have any idea what to do. First, a little background. I'm an airline pilot for a regional airline out of St. Louis. I've been there about 3 years, flying CRJs through the skies for the likes of Delta and United. Last night, I was assigned as captain for a trip from St. Louis to Chicago, then Chicago to Missoula, Montana. When I showed up at the plane, I was pleased to see I'd be flying with Rick, one of the more seasoned first officers. I completed my checklist and we pushed back from the gate at 6 p.m. The first leg was uneventful. The skies were clear as we watched the sunset from 37,000 feet. It was during the next leg that things began to unravel. After the cleaning crews finished and the passengers were boarded for Missoula, I checked the weather on our route. There were some scattered thunderstorms over the Dakotas, but overall it looked to be a fairly smooth ride ahead. I had let Rick fly the first leg, so it was my turn. As we pulled out onto the runway and were cleared for departure, I pushed the throttle forward, and we sank back into our seats as 26,000 pounds of thrust shot us into the night sky. I decided to manually fly for a bit, seeing as there wasn't any harsh weather in our vicinity. It's a skill a lot of pilots don't keep up with, so I try to practice as much as possible. I followed the departure procedure as we banked to the west and began to climb up to our cruising altitude of 41,000 feet. Once we were out of 18,000 feet from our cruising altitude, I had Rick turn on the autopilot, and we settled back into our routine. It was just after 9 p.m. We watched the sun complete its descent as it continued to darken outside, and the stars began to cast their light across the skies. I turned on my display since it now seemed quite bright, and stared out at the heavens above us. As we reached our cruising altitude, and the autopilot commanded the airplane to level out, I could see a green light ahead of us. I thought it was another airplane passing in front of us at first, since green is the color of the right wingtip navigation lights on all aircraft. I watched the light cross in front of us from left to right, and just as my suspicions were about to be confirmed, the green light doubled back in front of us. I glanced down at the TCAS display, our version of a fish finder, which shows other aircraft above and below your altitude. But there wasn't anything on the display.
You see that?
Rick asked me. Yeah, I do. Nothing on the TCAS. Why don't you ask Center if there's any military traffic up here?
Center, this is Blue Streak 3611. Are you showing any traffic ahead of us?
Negative, Blue Streak. The skies are all...
The radios went crackly as if we were flying through a thunderstorm, but the skies were still clear. Rick tried the radio a few more times, but there was nothing. Try COM 2.
Still nothing.
Rick said.
That's so weird.
We began to pick up a hum through the static. The hum became louder and louder until it drowned out the static entirely. It sounded like a transformer almost, but much louder. I reached down and spun the volume knob down on the radio, but the hum kept increasing. I threw off my headset and glanced over at Rick. He was staring straight out of the window, his face green from the glow outside. "Rick!" I yelled. He just kept looking straight ahead. His mouth hung open. He was beginning to drool. "Rick!" Outside, there was this intense green light. It was completely blinding. Out of habit, I made another radio call to Center. Nothing. I turned off the autopilot and made a bank away from the blinding light. But no matter which way I turned, it was still the same. I had to squint to make out my instrument panel on the cockpit display. I then turned back towards Rick, and he was staring at me now. His mouth still wide open, drool gathering on his chin and running down his white shirt. Rick was there staring right at me 1 minute, and the next minute, he was gone. There was no sound. He just disappeared right in front of me. That was the last thing I remember before waking up in Missoula. I checked the news and there was nothing about our flight. I went to the website we used for dispatch information and it showed that my flight had landed on schedule. I don't really know what the hell is going on. I tried asking the front desk about Rick, but they said I had arrived by myself. None of it makes any sense. And I know I'll sound crazy if I try telling the police or my company what had happened. They'll think I've lost my mind. The thing is, I feel like I'm being followed now. When I was walking back up the stairs to my hotel room, after checking in with the front desk, I heard a door open from somewhere below me. Footsteps were coming up the stairs. And when I looked down, I could make out a thin gray hand grasping the railing. Its skin looked slick in the dim light. I hurried back to my room and closed the door, locking it twice. I put my ear to the door, and I could hear footsteps coming down the hall. As it neared my room, the lights dimmed. I could hear raspy breathing coming from the hallway. It just stood there for what seemed like ages. But I was too afraid to look and see what was out there. All of a sudden, the lights in the room grew bright, and I could smell what I could only describe as burnt matches. I gathered my courage and looked through the eye hole. But there was nothing there. I have no idea what was following me, or what happened to Rick. But I really don't want to leave the hotel room.